Hi, Jim Dowdles, back for week 2 of our first rendering project. And if you remember, what we did last week is I did the demo on this sketch of the Belvedere torso. It took about an hour, a little over an hour. You can spend more time on it than that, of course, hopefully not less. Today we're going to talk about a contour line drawing, a second layer over the top of this drawing. And then we're going to talk about transferring that second layer to art paper. In this case, it'll be Canson paper. It'll be a neutral gray, I believe I have steel gray Canson paper. So we'll talk about the transfer process and then we'll start rendering after that. So I've got my drawing here from last week. I'm going to take another piece of tracing paper and put it over the top of this, my sketch. Be able to see right through, should see through easily. I've got my board up, get it up as high as you can, as much of an angle as you can to your reference. There's my reference, there's my Belvedere torso. And I'm going to redraw, but I'm not just going to trace what's here. I'm going to follow that, but I'm going to look at this while I'm tracing it, redrawing it. And what I want to do is I want to be as accurate as I can with these contours that I'm seeing up here. Now, this was a sketch underneath, and it's a good sketch, it's a fine sketch, but it's a sketch, and there's a lot of lines in there. So what I want to do for a transfer drawing is I want to keep a nice, clean contour line that I can transfer just the information that I need. Okay, there's a lot of diagonal lines, there's a lot of siding lines, but the idea is to keep looking at your reference, following what you've got here. You're going to find more information. Take your time. You know, there's not a race here, so if it takes 20 minutes, then it takes 20 minutes. If it takes more, that's okay too. So if you see any contours up here that are rough and uneven, and if you see any refinements that you can make, I'm not talking about big size differences or anything like that, but maybe you didn't get this little dip right there the first time around. So it's important that we do this second layer because, you know, if you transferred what you had before the sketch, might be okay, but this takes just a few more minutes and it's totally worth it. So moving around the form, you don't want to put any kind of cast shadows or a lot of information that's inside the form. The outside contour is really important. Inside, you got to be careful. You don't want to end up with a dark line after you've transferred it. So sometimes what I'll do is if I want an indication of a soft or a light line, like these ribs right here, I don't want them to be outlined. I want them to just have a soft guideline, if you will. But I don't want to have to redraw as I'm rendering. So I want enough information there that it took me a long time to get it, so I want to keep it. But I don't want to outline heavily. I don't want that to stay behind. So I've pretty much finished my contour line here, and this is a good way to tape it down too. So, you know, put a couple of pieces, maybe one more just for safety, across the top, or if you've got a big enough piece, you can put it underneath the clips there. But don't tape it down here, and then that way you can, you know, lift up and see, make sure that you've drawn everything. You can check it out like that, see if you missed anything. Now the last thing that I want to do is remember our red line. That was the very first thing that we did, was put a red line all the way around at the size of the project. And I said 15 by 18. 15 by 18 is a good good size for this, because we're thinking 14 by 17, so there's a little bit of room around. I could have actually left a little bit more space. That would have been nice. But and the other nice thing is that you can recompose this drawing. You could, before you tape it down or after, you can move it around a little bit and see what a better composition might be. You could maybe move it over this way, move it up a little bit, and then tape it down. And then I'm going to make these marks. You could draw with a ruler and draw red lines all the way around. What I'm just going to do is get my registration marks, and then I'll either draw a line around it or just transfer my registration marks. Okay, so this drawing right now is ready to transfer. And the next step will be to transfer it to Canson paper, and that's what we're going to do next. Okay, I've got a piece of Canson paper here that I've trimmed down. I don't need to use a whole sheet. A whole sheet is actually bigger than the drawing board, longer than the drawing board. So I trimmed it down about a couple of inches all the way around my drawing, which was 15 by 18. So I think this is 18 by 21, pretty close to that. That gives me plenty of room for my fingers holding on a taped border, which we're going to put on. And you don't ever want to cut your art paper to exactly the size that you need. You always want something to hold on to. If you've never used Canson paper before, there's something that you should know about it. I'm using, this is a steel gray color, which I recommended. Felt gray is good. Flannel gray is also good for this project. They're mid-value grays. Now there's a texture on either side of the Canson paper, and I'll hold that up and see if you can see that texture there. It's got little holes in it. It's from the blankets that they use to press the papers together. And you don't want that in your drawing, in your rendering. It's not that it's the wrong side of the paper. It's really good for pastel artists. They can the pastel will stay on the surface better with those little holes, I guess. What we want is, it's a texture, but it's sort of an uneven texture. It's more of a random texture. It's more natural. So you'll find that, you'll see that yourself. Use a black pencil. Don't try to look at the paper and figure it out. Half the time you're going to be wrong, or more. All you need to do is down in the corner of my drawing here, I just tested it just to make sure, and then you can put a little yes if you want to. Spending a lot of time talking about that, but it's really important. You don't want to get halfway through your drawing, because you're going to be putting some light layers of black and white at the beginning, and you probably won't see that texture until the end. So you won't know right away. You may, but why not start off with the right side? So we'll call that the right side anyway. So when you trim your paper down from whatever size it was, 19 by 26 to, let's say, 18 by 21, save the pieces that are left over. We're going to do a value scale on leftover piece, okay? All right. So this part of it gets kind of messy, or it can get kind of messy. I've taken my drawing. This is the contour line, the second layer that I accomplished just minutes ago, and turning it upside down, okay? Upside down, and I'm taping another piece of tracing paper to it, okay? So the reason for that is I'm going to use, this is black Conti. You could also use, it's on my materials list, you could use a black pastel, as long as it wasn't an oil pastel. You could use charcoal, but charcoal's a little too soft, I think, for this. We've tried black colored pencil on the back. It takes forever to put it on, and it does work, but it's going to take you like 10 times longer to put it on. So I think the best thing to use is the Conti crayon, and I drag it across the surface. I'm not going to get all dirty because I already did. Drag it across the surface, make it nice and flat and intense, and then rub it in with your finger or a tissue. The tissue might take too much of it off. I like to use my finger for rubbing it in because the oils in your finger seem to make the perfect transfer medium. So it's going to get a little messy, but it comes off, okay? So just make sure that you're covering your entire drawing And you can hold it up to the light and see if you've missed anything. And just keep going, and then rub it all in. And then get rid of, if there's any excess powder on the paper, make sure that you toss it, throw it away, okay? So I've taken my drawing with the separate sheet of tracing paper taped to the back that I put the black Conti on, and I'm ready for a drawing. I'm ready for a transfer, sorry. I'm going to use, so I can see it easily, I'm going to use a red pencil, and that way, you know, I can check easily just to make sure what I've transferred, but I'll see at a glance. And check your first line. Just to make sure it's transferring. I don't know if you can see that. It's pretty light, and it should be. I'll show you the drawing at the end when I transfer it. Okay. So let's do this first so I don't forget. I want my registration marks on there too. I put a little bit of Conti crayon behind those just to make sure that I could transfer them okay. Because I need those outside edges, that format, that composition line. Okay, now I'm going to redraw. Now don't press down hard, you don't need to. You can use a fairly sharp pencil, but don't press down too hard. You don't want to incise a line because you'll always be able to see that. When you put the black pencil over it, it'll stay light gray. It's better than a white paper, but it still doesn't need to show up, okay? So continue on with that. You know, if you want to check to make sure it's transferring okay, it looks like it's transferring pretty well. Good. So I've finished the contour line on the transfer drawing. And again, it's taped across the top so I can easily lift it up and check and make sure that everything's there. And I went lightly on these ribs because I don't want it to be too heavily outlined. And I did forget something. I forgot the navel. Very important landmark, right? Okay, so that's it. Now I'm ready. I have my registration marks in the corner and I'm ready to put some tape on. So I've put tape around my format, around the edges, because we're going to need that when we start doing a background against it. You always want to know what your parameters are of your composition. As far as a transfer drawing, it's very light, and it should be. Not sure if you can even see how light it is. If you can see that it's very light. So there was a couple of areas that came out really light, and since this is Conti crayon, it'll probably stay there. But as you work on it, since it's a powdery substance in the first place, it might tend to disappear if your hand goes over it. So if there was any really, really light areas, I just took a black Prismacolor because that's what we're using. This is a black Prismacolor Premier. And I just went over the line lightly. If there was any areas, especially on the inside, that I don't want the line to show at the end, and I thought it was a little heavy, I just took a kneaded eraser and softened it. You don't need to erase that way, you just need to soften it, like pounce on it, like that. And now I'm ready to start rendering, and that's what we're going to do next.